From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Kate Walsh. In November, Massachusetts voters passed ballot question 4, legalizing the recreational use of marijuana for adults ages 21 and over. Massachusetts was one of 5 states that had the issue on the ballot. The measure also passed in those 4 other states: Nevada, California, Arizona, and Maine. Now the state must move forward with determining the regulations for this new industry. The law is supposed to go into effect on December 15th, but it's likely to be pushed back further. The state won't generate any tax money from recreational marijuana sales for at least another year and a half, according to the state's Department of Revenue. So today on 22 News in Focus, we'll be looking at the marijuana industry in Massachusetts. We did extend invitations to the state treasurer's office, 2 local district attorneys, several police departments, and state lawmakers, but none were able to be here. We do have 2 supporters of the marijuana industry, and later in the program, 2 local mayors. Joining me first are Peter Bernard, director of the Massachusetts Grower Advocacy Council, and Richard Evans. You were the chairman on the Yes on 4 campaign. Thank you both for being here today.
My pleasure.
First, can you talk a little bit about your organizations and what your goal was? I know your goal was obviously to pass marijuana, but what you were trying to do in the long term.
Oh, that's a good question. Obviously, I was affiliated. I was chair of the campaign, the Yes on 4 campaign, and what marijuana legalization broadly attempts to achieve are ultimately the same goals that prohibition sought to achieve: the protection of the public health and safety, the eradication of the black market, the curbing of abuse, those things. And in the case of legalization, we're trying to create new industries and new jobs and new opportunities for people. And so that's what we hope question 4, the success of question 4, will accomplish. And it's going to take all of us working together to make it work. You know, there's going to be a lot of confusion, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. And none of us have ever experienced this before. So I suspect that as we speak right now, there are municipalities, there are institutions, there are businesses sort of rolling up their sleeves and asking themselves, how can we make this work? How can we achieve those goals I just identified? And that's a duty I think we all have. You know, 1.7 million voters voted in favor of question 4, and I think we have a duty, and all of us have a duty to try to make it work. A duty to those citizens, and that's what I hope to do.
Why did you get involved in this?
Well, I've been an activist for marijuana law reform for many years, and it stems from way back when I was in law school. And I took a course in constitutional law, and I couldn't square what I was reading in constitutional law with what I was seeing. And that got me interested, and I pursued it from there.
Interesting. And how about you?
Well, our group, the Massachusetts Grower Advocacy Council, we concern ourselves with matters around the cultivation and processing of cannabis and the regulations and legislation that's going to be coming around it. A lot of the regulations and rules haven't been written yet. The Cannabis Control Commission is yet to be named, and that's going to be kind of up to them. So our organization hopes to bring something to the table to make sure it's done responsibly and reasonably, whereas we are the growers. Without the growers, there is no industry in this state. If the voters have decided that this is what they want to do, then we need to make it work and make it work right.
I think Peter mentioned an important word there, and that's responsibility. If this law is going to work, it's going to mean more than just enforcing the new rules. It's going to mean that if marijuana legalization is a success, and it's not going to be just because these fine rules weren't breached, you know, that somebody had 6 plants instead of 7 plants or something like that. It's going to be that we have all helped foster a new culture of responsibility toward marijuana. And what that means is that we all need to acknowledge some basic truths, some axioms, if you will, that marijuana is not for kids. You don't drive impaired by marijuana or operate dangerous machinery. You recognize the difference between use and abuse of marijuana. That's one thing that prohibition has always prevented us from acknowledging, that there's a distinction between use and abuse. And in fact, we have traditionally conflated those 2 concepts, which makes about as much sense as conflating war and peace and ignorance and strength and you know, something out of Orwell. And so this development of this culture of responsible use, I think, is the most important thing that all of us can do, is recognize it's not for kids, it's not for drivers. Let's, as I said, acknowledge the distinction. And we don't want to violate the rights of other people. So consumers of marijuana, smokers at least, should adhere to the protocols that apply to cigarette smoking, it seems to me. Well, we've all got a lot of work to do to make this work, but I'm confident we can, and the voters of Massachusetts have given us instructions to do it, and we're going to do it.
Well, I think part of the challenge that we face with this, having been in Prohibition for about 100 years now, is that all of us, and the age ranges between the three of us sitting here, we can all attest that we grew up hearing the equivalent of Nancy Reagan's Just Say No. There was Reefer Madness, there was Let's Beat Up the Hippies in the 70s, and the way Richard Nixon rolled out the Narcotics Schedule Act so that he could make it really easy to do that, which has made even more of a nightmare now with cannabis as far as a medicine goes. So it's all been ingrained into our culture. To those people that haven't gone and sought out this information for themselves, that, hey, it's a bad thing, you shouldn't be doing this, while at the same time tossing back martinis. And to a lot of people, myself included, I don't really see much distinction between that martini or that marijuana cigarette. In the known history of man, there has not been one overdose on marijuana. The only way marijuana is going to kill you that way is if a 1-ton bale of it falls on your head. But people die of alcohol poisoning every day. They die of alcohol detox. You can actually die from detoxification of alcohol. Yet we sell this on the store shelves and in the supermarkets. If we can do that in what society deems to be a socially responsible way, the voters have said they want to do that with cannabis too. So we need to make that work right. We need to work with the towns to make sure that it's safe.
Do you think that the stigma surrounding marijuana for, people who think that there's a problem with it has changed since the election?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. That's one of the biggest changes I've noticed since the election, actually. More and more people are willing to talk about it. I've heard from people that I had no idea had any knowledge or experience with marijuana, and they've started telling me their stories. I think we're going to see a whole new genre of literature coming out in the next 6 months, perhaps. I like to call it pot confessionals, but everybody's got a pot story. Everybody's got a pot story. But they've been bottled up for many, many years, and now they're starting to come out. I talked to a bookstore owner the other day up in Northampton who's going to put a new shelf, and she's going to have an event and invite people to come in and tell their marijuana stories. And I've had people call me since the election. Like I had an 80-year-old client call me, said, "Come over, I need to see you." And I had no clue what I thought there was a family calamity or something. And I sat down on his dining room table, and there was a fresh legal pad. He brings out a box and sets down a jar, nice clean peanut butter jar, big green, beautiful marijuana buds. And he said, "Hey, I've got about a pound of this upstairs and don't know what to do with it. Can you help me?" I mean, he'd grown it in his garden, didn't know what to do with it. He would never have told me that 6 months ago. So yes, there's a whole new openness about marijuana, and it's a very healthy thing, and it will allow us to work through this period of awkwardness so that we can arrive at that point where we achieve those goals we talked about earlier.
So, we're all smiling here, but do you think that's also this new culture, I guess, is going to attract younger people? We hear how alcohol, the age is 21. This is age 21, but we all know 18-year-olds in college, high school kids, they're drinking. Why wouldn't they be smoking?
I tell you what, Kate, I'm 49 years old, and I'm finding that there are more people in my age group and older that are expressing interest. I travel in some pretty diverse social circles. I know a lot of young people, a lot of old people, and in between. And it seems like the older generation is finally saying, well, it's legal now. Well, maybe there's something to it. I've had a lot of people I never would have thought would have asked me questions, asking me all kinds of questions all of a sudden, now that the question is passed.
Yeah. We never used to talk about the merits of marijuana. It was always about the dangers or the risks of marijuana. But now I'm finding people are having these conversations, and someone asked me the other day, "What's so great about marijuana?" This was before the election, and I recalled Carl Sagan's famous question that he asked, which was, what's wrong with using a drug that produces serenity, insight, sensitivity, and fellowship, qualities so desperately needed in this mad and dangerous world? And that was the answer I gave him.
Well, obviously you guys love marijuana, but after the break we're going to...
No, we don't love marijuana. We love marijuana legalization, and we abhor marijuana prohibition.
Okay, we're going to be talking about how that's actually going to play out in the next few months when it comes to state lawmakers making important laws we need in order to make this a success. So you're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the new marijuana industry in Massachusetts. There are a lot of questions as to how that's going to play out here. It obviously passed by a large margin, as you said, in November, but now everyone's wondering what's next. December 15th was supposed to be the day that this became legal, at least for people to grow marijuana at home. So are we going to see that on December 15th? And if not, why?
Well, yes, we're going to see it on the 15th or the 16th or the 17th. And, you know, I've been waiting for this to happen for 40 years, and a few more days is going to make a big difference one way or the other. But what I'm more concerned about are the rumblings we hear from Beacon Hill about the probable or the possible necessity of delaying the other parts of the law, you know, the commercial parts of it. The licensing aspect, and I yet have not heard any good reasons. I've heard some excuses, but I haven't heard any good reasons from any legislators as to why a delay is necessary. You know, the excuse that takes the cake, I think, was the one state rep who said we need to take a serious look at how this law is written. It's been sitting on his desk for a year. And he's telling us that he hasn't bothered to read it. He doesn't know how it's written. That's not good faith. And I think the voters of Massachusetts are not going to stand for that response from the legislature. If there are good reasons why we need to delay, then let's hear them. But we haven't heard any yet.
And why do you think there's going to be a delay?
Well, I think there's going to be delays to parts of this simply because there's opposition in the House and the Senate that people didn't want to see it happen. As far as any kind of delays to December 15th. A week ago this past Thursday, I was at Senator Stan Rosenberg's office speaking with his policy advisor, Mark Daly. And he assured me at that time that December 15th is December 15th, and my other concern was the statute about home grows, because there are rumors flying around about how people want to kill the home grow. Now, home grow is important for a lot of reasons. Primarily, it helps prevent a monopoly from taking foot in the state. The first recreational licenses are due to be rolled out under the law in January of 2018. And that kind of a delay, I want to hear some good reasons for it. We've got over a year. I mean, we've got a lot of good people on Beacon Hill. A couple of them should be able to get it together in a year.
And my question about that is, are there certain types of marijuana plants that can legally be grown and some that can't, or are they all free to? You
can grow whatever strain your little heart desires. The trick is getting your hands on what your little heart desires. Right now that's restricted to the medical community. Medical patient, I don't have too much trouble with that. On December 15th, people will have trouble with that because there won't be a people do it online.
Can they be shipped here if it's federally illegal?
Not legally, but it happens. It happens all the time. It's not at all legal as far as I know. I mean, if you're using the post office, you're using a federal resource to break federal law. But it does happen.
I'd like to hear about this as well. I've been reading articles about how in Colorado, since it is federally illegal still, they haven't been able to put their money into federally insured banks. I read one article where they were actually storing cash in a cave with guards outside.
Yeah, they have vault rooms. There's actually something sitting in D.C. right now called the CARES Act, which in part would allow on a federal level cannabis businesses to do banking without fear. It's been sitting there for a while. Mr. Moulton is co-sponsoring that bill from our state. And
So here, that must be something else that they'll have to decide in the next year, right? Because how will that money be used for tax revenue if it can't be stored in banks or anything?
Well, the medical marijuana dispensaries thought they would encounter that problem, but they found banks to accept their business. And I'm confident that by the time January of 2018 rolls around and the non-medical stores open their doors, hopefully, that there will be banks to serve them. There could be major changes on the federal level. Look, the federal prohibition, I think we can all agree, is fairly insane. And whether it can be enforced is a big question. Certainly they can't enforce it on a local level. There's just not the federal resources to replace local police to enforce the prohibition laws. Whether they will loosen the laws like banking and other things, we'll see. I don't see how it's going to be in the political interest of the new administration to crack down on the marijuana. I know that Mr. Sessions, who he's President-elect Trump has nominated for Attorney General, is very opposed to marijuana. But my guess is that he's got bigger things on his plate, and that if he makes a serious threat about shutting down the new marijuana industry in all the legal states, then the Congress will make the necessary changes. And there's another possibility too, and this is the prospect that President Obama could make some changes unilaterally using his executive authority on his way out of office.
Do you see that happening with just about a month about a month left?
It's possible. It's possible. We'll see. We'll see. I wouldn't put it past him.
He admitted to inhaling, so you never know.
So there's a lot of lobbyists, obviously, that are against marijuana.
Lobbyists?
We saw that with Arizona. A lot of big corporations lobbying against it.
Yes, Arizona, as you mentioned, was the one state where the voters did not approve of legalization. And I suspect one of the reasons for that was the pharmaceutical industry, most notably the folks that make OxyContin. Put $500,000 into the opposition campaign in Arizona.
Did you see that in Massachusetts as well?
We saw a lot of big liquor and alcohol money in Massachusetts behind the opposition campaign. I don't know that we saw a lot of big pharma. Peter, maybe you know.
The Boston Archdiocese.
Why would that be that alcohol and tobacco would be so against it? Would it be competitive?
Competition.
Yeah, that's the apparent reason. The ostensible reason would be competition. But the data out of Colorado is that legalized marijuana has not really eaten into the alcohol profits very much. The alcohol sales have remained fairly level out there.
When it comes to regulating and taxing marijuana, obviously it takes different forms. One of them could be a marijuana cigarette, as you were talking about. So because there's not one way that you can enjoy, I guess, marijuana, you can't tax it like a cigarette tax and that's it, right?
Well, no, you couldn't tax it by quantity. You'd have to tax it by dollar value, like a sales tax. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it, there's a combination of 10% worth of state sales and sin taxes on it.
Yes, that's right. Peter's correct. Whatever form it's sold in, under the new law, it will be taxed. It will bear the usual state sales tax of 6.25%, plus a new excise tax of 3.75%.
No matter what the form is.
Yes, whatever form it is, plus 2% to the local municipality if they wish to impose that tax.
So I've heard on this program from state lawmakers that they would like to see the tax even higher, but that might cause a problem with the black market,
Precisely.
right?
That's exactly right.
Could you talk about that?
I was on the committee that drafted question 4, and we intentionally left the taxes low, about half what Colorado's level was, with the idea that we would squeeze out the black market in the early years, and then the legislature would raise the taxes in future years, like they've done with cigarettes.
Do you see that as a possibility that the black market could disappear?
Not if they raise the taxes like that and they drag their feet on recreational licensing, because the longer they drag their feet on that, now you're going to have a black market and a gray market for recreational. And that's not a good situation to have. You're still going to be clogging up the courts, and you're going to be clogging up the jails with cases that don't need to be there.
You know, there's no reason why this can't work. It's worked in the other states. It's going to work in a lot more states. It's different. It's unfamiliar, but we can make it happen. We all of us, we legislators, we municipal officials, we citizens especially, have simply got to accept the reality the happy reality that we've finally gotten real about marijuana in Massachusetts, and we can make this work. I'm confident we can.
You know, we floated an idea past Mark Daly, the policy advisor, while I was up there, to adopt a custom they use in other states. Like in Colorado and California, there are ways for people who grow outside of the system to sell to a retail or dispensary outlet up to a certain limit so as not to circumvent cultivation licensing. But it takes a huge bite out of the black market, because now you've got people that might have otherwise been nickel and dime dealers and put the product on the black market where it doesn't get taxed. If they can walk into an outlet and sell it legally there, they put it into the legal revenue stream, and they've created themselves some taxable income. And if they're a low-income family, they might be able to have a better Christmas or Hanukkah that year because they had a good crop that fall.
So would all of the growers have to be in Massachusetts to sell in Massachusetts to stores that
Under the new law, you can, yes, the new law is a Massachusetts law which governs cultivation, processing, and retail sales in Massachusetts strictly. Everything takes place in the state.
I don't think that we'd be able to take people from outside. If somebody came across the border and tried to sell, that might be an issue that legislators would have an issue with, and I can understand that. I believe it's for Massachusetts. We should kind of try to keep it as much for Massachusetts as we can.
And you know, I think I want to emphasize that there's a role in this for everybody. Every institution, every business, every school is going to impact them in some way, or affect them in some way. And all of us need to be thinking about what are the changes we need to make in our rules and our policies to accommodate this new reality. I mean, for example, we're in a television station right now. Now, a year ago, if you'd had a cooking show, you would never dream of having a show about cooking with marijuana, would you? But would you today?
I don't know. I'm not the boss.
Ask the manager.
Exactly. So there are going to be a lot of changes, and we look forward to hearing from you guys again. I'm sure you'll be working closely with the state lawmakers and using your knowledge and research and forming all of these big laws we need to make now in order to make this all work. So thank you very much, both of you, for being here today. After the break, we're going to be talking to 2 city mayors in Western Massachusetts about their thoughts on legalizing marijuana. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the regulation of marijuana in Massachusetts. While the legislature begins formulating regulations for this new industry, many cities and towns are wondering what their rights and responsibilities are. So joining me now to discuss their concerns and talk about this issue are Chicopee Mayor Richard Koss and West Springfield Mayor Will Reichelt. Thank you both for being here today.
Excellent. My pleasure.
You guys were watching as we were talking to the 2 supporters of marijuana. First, what were your thoughts?
Well, if I may, you know, we respect the voters. We're going to be implementing this law as it comes due. I think one of the concerns, and you heard it, that this is a work in progress. And as a work in progress, it's a lofty goal. And as we look at the actual legislation that's going to be implemented, unless it's changed or amended, it leaves a lot of loopholes, it leaves a lot of openings, it leaves a lot of areas of concerns for local control. And I think that's really the major overriding concern that I think as for both and most cities will have.
Absolutely, and when we worked through the medical marijuana, I happened to be the attorney in Agawam before I became mayor and got to write both those ordinances. And there was pushback in the sense that there were councilors that wanted to ban it outright. And the AG had ruled back then that the nature of the statute as it was that you had to allow it somewhere. So we don't really know yet what the zoning implications are going to be for recreational marijuana and how it's going to kind of go hand in hand with, and if it's going to go hand in hand with medical marijuana. So our concern is, you know, how is it going to work for us, and also how is it going to work for the safety of our residents? Because there's a lot of, as we said too, they mentioned growing locally. How is that going to affect kind of our residents, our police force, public safety in West Springfield and in Chicopee?
And Kate, both of our cities have passed responsible ordinances which allow the medical marijuana facilities. We have one under construction as we speak. West Side, I think, is approved too.
Yes.
And that being the case, but it was a ordinance in both instances that allowed for zoning consideration in terms of the type of area, the location, how close you are to schools, how close you are to daycares, you know, public facilities. So there's a lot of meat that needs to be put on the bone. one of the concerns we had in listening to your previous guests were the fact that it's a work in progress. Well, it's nice to have those type of goals, but as mayors, we have to worry about day-to-day public safety and public health issues. And because of the vagaries in this statute as we have now, our concern is where that meat is going to be and how it applies to each of our cities and towns, as the case may be.
And they mentioned dates a lot. We as mayors, I'm in no rush to implement this without knowing what the real effects are going to be. I'm in no rush to just put this out on the streets and then say, oh, well, we could have done this better, we could have done that, and we're now the ones dealing with what's left over, then have to go back and try again. We'd rather get it right the first time. We understand the voters passed this, and we respect that, but we want to make sure that whatever the law ends up being, it makes sense not just for the industry or for users, but for communities as well as a whole. So
the concern is really the unknown of what this could mean.
Yes.
But are there specifics as well for your cities as to, driving under the influence of marijuana, getting arrested? What are some of the real concerns that
Absolutely, man. You mentioned that as we were sitting over there.
Well, what's interesting, the right to have an FID card. The chiefs of Massachusetts, reviewing this law, and it's been brought to my attention that the federal law still prohibits possession or use of marijuana. They utilize federal law for the granting of the FID card or the license to carry. So technically, the law is such that though you may comply with Massachusetts law and be in possession of marijuana pursuant to this statute, it could prohibit you're getting an FID card or having it revoked because, in fact, you're violating federal law, which controls that licensing apparatus.
So right now, if someone were to have a medical marijuana license, would that come up if they were trying to get an FID?
It's my understanding that the federal law supersedes that as well.
And that would that show up on their file as something?
I think that's part of the application process.
Likely part of the background check. And again, we haven't had medical marijuana in place for that long, so we haven't had a chief, or my chief hasn't denied anyone yet because of that and had it be appealed, so the courts haven't ruled. But again, that's where medical hasn't been around for a long time. They're just starting to open stores now. There's, I think, only one in Northampton open in Hamden County. So we really haven't seen what the effects of medical are, and now we're jumping to recreational. So that's why we're hesitant and we're concerned, because how does it impact us on a local level, and how does it impact our residents? And
what have you heard from your police departments about this?
No, and that's it. It's the enforcement. So clearly, the same way you're not able to smoke in public places, clearly this is a form of smoking in some instances. We have laws that you can't drink alcohol on public streets, open container laws. Well, it's the same law there in terms of perhaps this might have to be enforced in that way. So there's just a lot of nuances that it's said, well, it's going to relieve the police department for the amount of work they have to do. Our chief and our people in public safety are concerned that it may have the opposite effect.
And would that be in terms of driving? I keep hearing about, that's why I'm bringing that up, I keep hearing about that being one of the major concerns is people high while driving.
And there's no way to test it. If you're drunk and you're driving, they can give you a breathalyzer and it will say you blew a .08 or a point whatever, and you're either drunk or you're not drunk. For this, like even now with drug tests, it stays in your system for 30 days. There's no way to test how potent it is in your system now. So really, there's no way to even tell if you were under the influence while you're driving. All we could tell is that you smoked within the past 30 days, but what does that mean, and how do you enforce it? And
as lawyers and doing that type of work, that was one of the reasons that they have the breathalyzer. It's a very objective test. .8 is a measure that you can't argue with. Above is presumed, below is presumed not to be under the influence. Now it has to be very subjective, how he's behaving, or he or she, what the mannerisms they have, what recollection. So it's going to create much more issues in that regard. We're not even there yet. We're more concerned really just about just the distribution. Again, we both have communities that have been very pragmatic, very proactive in terms of addressing the medical marijuana, and ours is under construction. It should be completed in the next 5 or 6 months, and they'll start cultivating so that in 2017 they'll be able to distribute. And I think, Will, you're probably very similar in West Springfield. So it's not communities that are saying no, we're just looking to see how this was going to roll out and what protections are there.
Then on the other hand, West Springfield did vote against recreational as a community. Voted in favor of medical, against recreational, and we're doing just like medical marijuana. We're initiating a moratorium just so that we can see what the state does, because there's two parts really. There's what the law is going to say, but then what the Cannabis Control Board decides on regulations, or Cannabis Control Commission,
And they'll have,
and what else we could do.
so they'll
And that
basically-
commission hasn't even been formed yet.
Right.
It has to be appointed, draft their rules and regulations, which will then be imposed on us.
Do you see December 15th as the actual start date of when this law is implemented, or do you think that there's still going to be a lot to do before people can even grow at home?
I guess we'll see. I mean, my understanding is, from when I've seen, all that December 15th date is a tallying of the ballots and a vote by the Governor's Council. And if the effect date for marijuana essentially being legalized in Massachusetts is that date, and then you can home grow, I mean, I would probably see it happening around that time. But I think then there's still the question of the other stuff that's in the law, and if that law gets changed, because the legislature has the opportunity to make changes to it, and what those changes are going to be. So it probably will be close to that. I doubt it's going to be delayed that much, but even still, what comes next?
People home grow, let's be honest, now. They have plants in their basement, they have plants in their yard. Will it make much of a difference when this becomes legal, so to speak, or do you think it's going to be the same?
Well, public safety as a concern, you have to realize that quite often both our communities advertise ourselves as the crossroads of New England. And I think it's pretty well known that, you know, the 91 corridor is a great way to make it through New England, but also is probably been used maybe for drug trafficking more than it should be, if at all. As a result, the concern there is, and some of the material from the Mass Municipal Association worries about, until such time as the stores open and are licensed, that people at home could actually, under the rules and regulations that's promulgated, could probably market as much as $60,000 worth of marijuana on an annual basis. And that would be unregulated, untaxed, and just wondering to what degree that then becomes a place for drug personnel, people who want to be involved in that way of life, to start focusing on Massachusetts as really a supply point for the rest of New England, because we really are the only state in New England that has allowed this.
Interesting. After the break, we're going to be talking about how cities could benefit from this once the marijuana is actually taxed. But for now, you're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the issues surrounding the legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts. So we're continuing our conversation now with Chicopee Mayor Rich Koss and West Springfield Mayor Will Reichelt. Before the break, we were talking about the concerns you had about just implementing this and what it means for your cities, but how could you benefit from this, if at all? It is supposed to be taxed. People voted on this, some of them, to make money for the state. They figured if it's happening anyway, might as well get some money out of it. Do you see that as something that's going to happen for your community?
You know, I think the consensus is no. You know, for the most part, the amount of effort that's going to go into this and regulating it, monitoring it, working in both public safety, probably in our schools. They're looking at the sales tax to be applied, which is 6 1/4, an additional 3.75 state tax, and then a local option tax of 2%. And that won't really come into play until it's starting to be sold by by licensed entities, which would be 2018. So this is not going to be a moneymaker. This is not going to be anything that cities or towns are looking or will be actually showing a positive result from. I mean, this is clearly a right that's going to be implemented. And our concerns, as we said earlier and continue to say and worry about, is how it gets implemented in a positive way that has the least negative impact both on our education, public safety, and public health sectors.
And again, that will go to see what the regulations show. You know, for medical marijuana, we both have them. They're new businesses, new buildings. It's new growth in taxes, which is beneficial. But at the same time, if the recreational can be sold in convenience stores, or if it could be sold in different places that don't require a real new business, just requires a license like alcohol, then we're not going to see those same kind of benefits. The taxes will likely maybe offset the cost in either increased enforcement or other issues we'll have around regulating it or around enforcing it in general. But a huge boost to our bottom line, I don't see that happening.
And Kate, if I could, I have a city council, and I'm sure Will does as well, that's very responsive and very concerned about how these things are implemented. And they were very, very conscientious, Will in drafting his and in Chicopee and implementing ours, to make sure that we dealt with the type of issues of where it's located and the proximity and minimizing the impact on residents and even other businesses, because some of these, some businesses, this is not a conducive neighbor. So that we have to really balance what goes on here and make sure as this gets implemented, it is an overall benefit for our city.
Do you have the authority to ban the sale of marijuana? I know Northampton, they can't sell cigarettes, right?
That's
or
unfortunately,
tobacco.
the law says that we cannot. We can put it up for a referendum, a vote of the people to ban it. But as mayors and in conjunction with our city council, we, under this law, cannot ban it unilaterally.
Do you think that there will be regulations on this like there are for licenses for alcohol? There's a limited amount for how many restaurants can serve alcohol. Do you think there's going to be something like that for marijuana and how many places it can be sold?
We hope so.
Yeah, and I think the statute's preamble talks about having marijuana distributed very similarly to how alcohol is in the Commonwealth. And there's actually reference to limitations not being less than a certain amount of liquor licenses. So that, but even the placement of 3 or 4 in each of our communities in terms of places to be distributed is going to need regulations, is going to need controls, and it's going to need legislative guidance and then our local public input and public control. As mayors, we get calls every day about concerns in neighborhoods, concerns about what's going on, not only in residential but business sections of our communities. And it's very frustrating when a law comes down that seems to limit our ability to be able to be proactive and address what those concerns might be.
So what powers do you have as mayors in this law in making it work for your community? So
far, from the way it's written now, and I think that's a lot of our concern and the legislators' concern, is very little. It's kind of silent in how much zoning authority we'll have on where to put it. It really says that we can't ban it at all unless we get a vote of the people. And for West Springfield, we voted against it, but that was with a 70% turnout. We don't know what it looks like otherwise. With Chicopee voting for it, you don't know if what's going to be in the best interest, and you want to be able to have more authority to cite it different places. But once a statute says that it's allowed and you can't ban it, 40A in zoning says certain other uses are just allowed. So it really gives us no control, and we're kind of left working with what the regulations say and kind of citing in the best places possible. But it doesn't give us enough control, unfortunately, yet. And that's kind of like what we're looking for, especially when our residents have concerns.
And I think, as I said, and we have a good example with the medical marijuana. We went out for response, RFPs, response for proposals. We reviewed it. We had our health director, our building, our planner, because there's a revenue component, city treasurer, also from a public safety, my police chief. They reviewed people who were interested, made recommendations to me as the awarding authority. We went through that process. It then went before the city council, and in compliance with our ordinance that dealt with medical marijuana facility in our community. They were in the right zone. They were far away from the type of entities and businesses or services that you were concerned having that close by, and it worked. So we think this is a process that will work, but as opposed to saying let's just do it and we'll figure out the pieces later, we're saying no, let's figure out the pieces first before we start implementing legislation.
Let's get it right up front so that we're not left with something that's half-baked and
we're not in a position as mayors. Every day our job is to provide a safe and secure city. To say, well, this is a work in progress just doesn't work with us.
No.
I mean, we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms and the protections in place. And I know in talking to my city council members, that's what they want too. It's not are we for it or against it, but how do we comply with the law in a way that's reasonable and rational to provide for public health and public safety in our communities.
Excellent. After the break, we're going to be talking about something completely different, so we hope you stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been talking about the issues surrounding the legalization of recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. Of course, you just heard from the West Springfield and Chicopee mayors how it could really affect their communities if it's not implemented properly. And now we're going to ask you guys, while we have you here, what other concerns you have for your cities in 2017. What are some of the top things that you are really focusing on?
I think one thing that I think all of us mayors and all local officials should really have a concern is, with the governor cutting earmarks yesterday, what is the fiscal outlook for the state going to be next year? And for us, what is local aid going to be? And how are we going to have our schools funded? How are we going to have our roads repaired, infrastructure fixed? I know Mayor Koss can talk definitely about that. But really, what's the money going to look like? What's the financial outlook going to be? And if it's bad for us, if it's bad for the state, it's bad for us. And that means it's bad for our residents. We have to look at cuts. I mean, we have all kinds of projects we want to get done, but we need money for that.
And old urban communities just have so many infrastructure needs. I don't think the residents appreciate how much of our budget is paid from outside sources. We all pay property taxes, we pay our taxes, but we don't realize that to some degree less than half our budget is made up of real estate and property taxes. The rest have federal and state sources. So we really are a ward of both the federal and the state in terms of so many ways. In Chicopee, you know, we have a number of infrastructure needs that continue to go. We're trying to pace those in a way that are more affordable. I think the path that we've taken to date has been maybe a little more aggressive because of mandates, and we're trying to modify those, still be very responsive to our needs, but at the same time much more cognizant of our ability to pay. And I think that's what we have to do on a daily basis. You know, we provide public safety, we provide, you know, public health, as we talked earlier about the cannabis issue, and our education. There's just so many components, but unfortunately they're all money driven.
Yes. And infrastructure issues themselves are so very expensive. Like, you start digging up roads and fixing pipes, you're looking at millions of dollars easily. And you can't always go back to the taxpayer and keep asking for more money, more money, more money, even though the problems are real and they're not going to get any better.
And Kate, it's funny, you open up a road to do a sewer, and while you have that road open, the water pipe that you thought was in good shape is not in good shape.
How many times have we covered water main breaks?
So what, and so what do you do? Do you fill up that road and not deal with that pipe, or then all of a sudden unexpectedly you're adding a million or whatever exorbitant amount that is to do that? It's prudent, but at the same time it's unexpected, and quite often it's a challenge. You know, we're very blessed though in Western Mass. I know as in the city of Chicopee, with our water supply from Quabbin, we haven't had any overall, you know, limitations in terms of our usage of water, other than trying to conserve as best we can. As mayors, when we travel and go to conferences west of the Mississippi with the droughts that they're having, to some degree we're blessed, but we pay for that blessing.
Yes.
Right.
But
And try to be proactive, because a lot of times we're reactive, and that's where it gets expensive. If we can plan out, and now when everything needs to be fixed, it's hard, but to be proactive and pick projects that are cost effective, but also take a big bite at low-hanging fruit that makes sense and overall improves our water system, improves our sewer system, improves our roads. Everyone sees roads, so everyone loves to pave, but it's really the stuff under the roads that are starting to fade and are starting to get very expensive.
Infrastructure is actually something that Donald Trump talked a lot about. Now that he's going to be president, and you do receive a lot of federal funding in addition to state and local money, do you see that as a possibility in getting some more money for your communities?
Well, that's been a request for decades now by cities and towns, so we'll have to see where that goes. Hopefully, yeah, I just hope spring's eternal. But on the other side, the reality is that each city and town, not only in Massachusetts but in this country, have these type of issues, and the pocketbook that will be needed for that. I think if we could have a start, that'd be great. I think as mayors, one of the mottos I have, and I tell kids when I talk about being a mayor, my job is to try to make my city better 10, 15% every year, so that after you're here for 4 years, you've made a 50% improvement. Hopefully, we'll see what happens.
And again, a lot of these times there are state programs, there are federal programs, but with 351 communities in Massachusetts, we're competing against 350 other communities to get a smaller pot of money. So to us, to me, my project is incredibly important, but to Mayor Koss, my project isn't that important. His is, and the mayors out in Boston or in Worcester, the town managers, their projects are important. So it's just difficult to divide up that sum, and everyone has the same issues. As you said, across the country, we all have the same infrastructure issues.
Is there anything you can do to try to push your state lawmakers that represent you guys to get this issue to be a bigger deal at the State House for you? Or?
Well, they're very cognizant of it, but there's just a lot of other priorities, you know, healthcare costs, as well as education, public safety. There's just so many different birds in the nest that are looking for a worm that's getting cut into smaller and smaller pieces.
And for the most part, the infrastructure is working. So people wonder, well, why are we all worried about it? The bridge works, my toilet works, everything works. Why are you the canary that's screaming it's not going to work? And the problem is it works until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, we're too late.
Right, yeah, and you don't have any money to fix it.
Correct.
How about other issues that you may face in the year ahead, or hopes for the year ahead? Do you have any other big plans for your cities?
I mean, I think we both have a lot of overall projects in their way. A big thing for us is business development. You know, with the casino coming in 2018, we're looking at where we're all surrounding cities. We're looking at what those impacts will be for us and how we can our businesses can improve with that, how we can attract more businesses into West Springfield, into Chicopee, and how we can just continue to make our communities a better and better place and really be more customer friendly and have better service for our residents at a cheaper rate.
I think one of the things that people don't appreciate is the camaraderie among the mayors of Western Mass in working together. You know, quite often we're looking for businesses to come from out of the area, and we try to make sure we give a message that whatever community they locate in will be a good choice, though each of us have our own strengths, and we don't try to indicate to any outside interest the faults of any other communities. We try to emphasize what's positive about each of our community, because clearly a business located in one of our communities is a plus for that city or town, but really the workers that will come and supply that business are going to come from all of our cities and towns. So there really is a camaraderie. We meet often, and in doing so try to share both best practices but also some solutions that we may not have thought of on our own.
Thank you so much for both being here today and talking about some important issues for your communities. You're watching 22 News in Focus. We'll have the last word for you after the break. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. On today's program, we've been discussing the possible regulations and effects from the legalization of recreational marijuana here in Massachusetts. State lawmakers have yet to create an oversight agency, and many questions still remain on how this new industry will really be regulated. So that's our program for today, and we want to thank our guests for joining us, and thanks to you at home for watching. If you missed any of this, remember you can watch it all in full anytime on our website at wwlp.com. And from all of us here at 22 News, we wish you a wonderful Sunday.